Hi, a warm welcome and good morning to everyone in the Bay Area, and good afternoon to the ones that are dialing from Europe. Also on behalf of my colleagues, Aisha Plantes and Sietse Vermeulen, that helped me today behind the scenes with this webinar, we want to thank you for dialing in. The Dutch government supports the startup ecosystem in various ways and helps entrepreneurs with their internationalization. One of the questions we ask ourselves is how we can mobilize our network of entrepreneurs and mentors in the US to help you in the current situation even more. I'm really pleased to moderate today's webinar about pandemics and pivots with two great mentors from the Holland in the Valley network. Paul and Jock are two successful entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley. Let me just give you the short bio. Paul Kallmes has spent more than a dozen years in San Francisco's tech ecosystem, and he provides guidance to startups and investors around the world. He worked with many Dutch companies over the last years, and he's a specialist in intellectual property, in foreign market entry and fundraising. He currently works with companies in the US, Europe, and Africa on ways to adapt to the post-pandemic era. Jock Breitwieser is an award-winning communicator with over 20 years of international communications expertise in agencies, but also in-house at companies. Originally from Germany, Jock has lived and worked in the Bay Area for many years, and currently he's heading up marketing communications and PR at StorageCraft, a data security company. Thank you guys for your willingness to share all your insights with us today. Well, my name is Michael Dooijes, and I'm the startup liaison for the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the US, based out of San Francisco, the Mecca for innovation and entrepreneurship. The Dutch consulate remains open for business, also in these times of crisis. We've also pivoted, and we recently launched our activities through the e-consulate to San Francisco. And one of the things we are organizing is this series of webinars with practical tips and insights for entrepreneurs to help you navigate in the complex times. Now, it's no secret that the business for many startup founders is under pressure, having to rethink strategy and approach. Funding, runway, it's all critical and top of mind. But how do you determine your path forward in times of crisis? Should you wait until the storm has passed, or do you proactively adapt to the new reality? Well, I think one of the great examples of a pivot in this crisis is, of course, the pivot that Triage made with Aware. I think most of you will know that. Within 3 weeks, the founders, Janneke van der Heuvel and Steve Kroon, they pivoted and launched a new venture, a distance meter, helping retailers making the 1.5 meter economy a reality. But their mission remains still the same, helping to innovate around customer experiences in retail. The actual solution, though, is very different than before. And as far as I understand, this pivot has allowed them to really help retailers adjust and giving retailers a bit of a peace of mind while implementing Corona measures in their stores. And I think that's a great achievement. The mindset here is really very important. It's clear that for the founders, the glass is half full. You need to act your way into innovation and entrepreneurship, especially now. In today's webinar, Paul and Jock will highlight the urgency and the need for startup entrepreneurs to truly reflect on the business. You have to use this time to look into the mirror and strategically decide on the next steps. A pivot is never easy. Steering away from the original plan could feel uncomfortable, but the crisis gives you the opportunity to double check on the chances for success of your business. And you can ask yourself if you really solve a problem in the market going forward. Once you've made that conscious decision though, how can you still get the story across so it will live in the hearts and the minds of your audience? Now's the time to keep your audience well aware of what you stand for and what you can do for them. Positioning yourself and your company is more important than ever. But online, it's a crowded space, and you need to stand out. Well, Jock will give us his insights on the power of PR amidst this crisis. Mentors play a key role in our community to help startups internationalize, and they provide startups with a valuable outside-in perspective. Mentors in the Holland in the Valley network have in-depth knowledge about the situation on the ground in the Bay Area, and are familiar with both Dutch and American startup culture, mindset, and network to help make the move to the US a lot more seamless. With Holland in the Valley, the e-Consulate opens the door to a unique community. This public-private initiative consists of corporate partners, investors, mentors, and entrepreneurs from the Bay Area and the Netherlands. We facilitate matchmaking, helping young and ambitious entrepreneurs scale to the West Coast. Moreover, the Holland in the Valley community is fully online. With this network, we aim to provide startup entrepreneurs access to talent, to capital, to markets, to knowledge, and to government relationships, so you can grow and scale. Now, if you want to learn more about the Holland in the Valley community and the network and how to get access, just drop me an email. Just a few rules for today. We have around 50 minutes with Paul and Jock. During their presentation, we invite you to send in your questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. And as a moderator, I will keep an eye on your questions, and we will pick up on a few to address them with the speakers live, while on some of the other questions we will answer directly in the Q&A section. That's it for my introduction. Over to Paul. Please enjoy this session.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael and Aisha, and Jock and Sitsta as well. And thanks to everybody who's up early or up late in the day to attend our webinar. We hope it's useful in giving you some insights into what's happening in the world and how you might manage to deal with it. So when we were first discussing this idea of pandemics and pivots, Michael thought it would be good to have a viewpoint from how we see things here in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, on how the world is changing and how startups in particular can adapt to it. I think what was clear then and is clear, even clearer now, is that the world continues to change rapidly and isn't going back the way it was anytime soon. In fact, it never will. It will never be what it was before. And I think the sooner we all digest that lesson, the better off we'll be. So today I'm going to talk about things that I think are valuable when it comes to figuring out ways that a startup can deal with these unforeseen problems, these things that have all of a sudden appeared and made everything, in most cases anyway, exponentially more difficult. All right, give me a sec here. Most of you have probably heard the term black swan by now. Back on March 5th, no less an authority than Sequoia called the coronavirus the black swan of 2020. For those of you who don't know what a black swan is, by definition, I put it at the bottom, an unpredictable or unforeseen event, typically one with extreme consequences. I think it's safe to say that that's what's happening now. In fact, we don't really know what the consequences are. Therefore, we have to have our radar tuned to constant change and what that means for us and how we might be able to adapt to it. I think 24/7 diligence about the world around us has never been so important as during a black swan moment. So it's a new economic reality, or should I say an evolving economic reality, that has, in my mind, three components of the demographics that you as a startup or an ongoing company that's not in a startup mode anymore need to be aware of. For one thing, investors are likely to be more demanding and a little more discriminating, or a lot more discriminating, about how they invest, in whom they invest, and how much they invest. I think it's safe to say that capital will be harder to get. They may be more impatient about seeing results, and they may be less tolerant of either indecision or missteps on the part of startups. So you need to take a close look at yourself and make sure that you're meeting the expectations that you've set for your investors, among others, of course. One of the big problems for startups is that a lot of corporates are skeptical about whether you're going to be around in 3, 6, or 12 months. They may be, rightfully so, even more skeptical now about whether you're going to be around, and therefore their willingness to engage with you as a customer, as an investor, as a strategic, that may be even more in doubt. So I think it's up to you as, as a startup that is already trying to keep people convinced that you're going to be around in the future. Now it's even more necessary. I think Jock's going to give lots of useful advice on how you can go about doing that, but keep in mind that doubt and skepticism, they always were the order of the day. I think it's even more so now. So you need to understand how you are perceived in terms of reliability and sustainability by all your stakeholders, customers, of course, top among them. And the third demographic is your own employees. There's of course a lot of people out there looking for jobs already, which means it's a hiring market. But if you have a startup that isn't that stable, and if your employees know it, or they believe it, or they sense it, then they may be out there looking for jobs. There's certainly lots of different ways to look for new opportunities. And so they probably got their eyes and ears open for new opportunities that might be a little more stable. Stability counts for a lot in times like this. So it's up to you as a startup founder or a manager or a team leader to practice communication and inclusion to make sure that everyone's on board with what you're doing, that if people run into trouble or they start to think about bailing out, that you know this and you can prepare for it. I think candor and openness between management and employees, the team overall, has never been more important. It's always critical, but now especially so. So the place to start here is what I call startup triage. I'm guessing most of you know the triage is usually found on the battlefield or in a crowded ER. They're doing it here with coronavirus, and it's a very difficult process that takes a look at the condition of each and every unit, whether it's a person or a startup or whatever it might be, and goes through a process to determine who should we try to save and who should be let go. It's very, very difficult. In fact, it's hard to imagine something more difficult than doing triage when a person's life or a startup's life is at stake. A lot of you have a great deal invested in your companies, not just money, but a hope, ambition, sense of self, you name it. But this coronavirus is really pushing us into a triage situation. And I think you as a startup have a duty to practice what I call radical honesty with yourself about whether or not you really can and should try to survive. Because if not, and it's, again, I'm not suggesting it's easy to think about shutting down your own business at a time when you might have had some hope things are going well, but I think the extent of changes is so extreme what's going on with coronavirus and the fact that we still don't know where it's headed, that you have to take these things seriously. And I think if nothing else, the exercise of going through a triage process will give you a clearer idea about your own viability and allow you to tell a better story to those around you so they understand how diligent you're being about yourself and your path going forward. So when you go through a triage process, which I'll describe a little bit about, you get to a go, no-go decision, which is, do we keep trying? And if so, how? And if we decide not to keep going, what do we do then? So these are very, very difficult things, but these are very difficult times. And as fearsome as it may sound, once you get started on it, I think you'll find that getting immersed in the issues, the details, will clear things up considerably and make your path forward that much more manageable. So what are some of the factors in making a go, no-go decision? Well, there's certainly more than just those 6. There's all sorts of them. I bet if we did a poll, we could find 50 items, 50 aspects of a business that are worth looking at when it comes to deciding whether or not we should keep going. I put ones that I think here are fairly universal. Obviously, cash is king. Cash on hand and access to cash is critical to you. So you need to do an inventory of your capital and access to capital and understand what's the maximum length and utility you can get out of that cash. Without a clear sense of that, you're probably not going to get very far for yourself or in anybody else's eyes. Team cohesion, mentioned before. You know, your company is your team. Your value is the way the team keeps together, pulls together, and makes things happen, especially in crisis mode like we have now. So the value of being open and inclusive with your team is impossible to overstate. I've been both lucky and unlucky to be in some corporate settings with good teams and some really bad teams. And the bad ones are really bad. And so today, I think all the bad things will be emphasized and the good things will be hopefully able to overcome them. Your product maturity is of course important. You've got, if you're 6 months out from your MVP, it's and you need another round of funding or another tranche to get to some sort of MVP, it's a pretty good chance that that's not going to bode well when it comes to surviving the next 6 months. You know it's going to be hard. It's going to be even harder to keep the focus on the product development process and the rollouts and all the things associated with it. So that's a big one. You got to be honest and realistic about where you're at. I'd love to talk about MVPs. We don't have time today, but it's a topic worth thinking about and what constitutes an MVP for you and how you can go about getting it together in a time of crisis. Market traction, of course, whether it's revenue or beta tests or strategic partnerships lined up, any number of things that indicate how the market knows you exist and cares that you exist, that's helpful to you. That's something you can use as a card to put on the table in front of an investor or someone you need to convince about your viability. Market traction is a benchmark of any company, and I think if you're lucky enough to have some now, treat it like the treasure that it is and get to work buttressing it and making sure people are aware it's there. Competitor activity is a big one. I deal with a lot of startups from around the world, and I find their awareness of competitive landscapes is often not what it should be. And I never really understand that, because what's more important to you than what your direct competitors are doing, assuming you know who they are? Nowadays, some companies will be just sheltering in place. Others will be out there being very active, maybe acquiring companies, maybe taking advantage of their competitors' weakness or uncertainty in times of crisis. Maybe you're that competitor that others are scared of and have the opportunity to hire away good people, to acquire teams or other assets from companies that are in trouble. This is the kind of 24/7 diligence you need to practice and be aware of who's out there that might be a target or who might be targeting you, again, now more than ever. And lastly, I put the burnout potential. Startups are hard. Any business is hard, but especially a startup. If you're a young founder, a first-time founder and CEO, you may be feeling the strain more than before. Again, the coronavirus is going to make the bad things worse. It's going to emphasize, hope it makes the good things better, but I don't know about that. But I'm certain in saying that it'll make the bad things worse. So if you're already burned out or feeling like you're under the gun in ways that you're not sure how to keep going, you need to factor that in, because a great deal of your survival depends on your ability and willingness to keep pushing ahead. So you got to be really honest with yourself. Really, that radical honesty I mentioned is hypercritical when it comes to assessing where you're at, where you can go, and whether you should go. And of course, like I said, there's lots more things to consider, but these I hope are useful to think about as you begin your own process of self-examination. So let's say you do go through some kind of triage process and you get to, or want to get to, a go, no-go decision. Well, if you arrive at no, I think it's fairly straightforward that you need to start some sort of orderly dissolution to return what you can to your stakeholders and to do the best you can by the people who are now not any longer going to be part of your outfit. Plenty of ways, plenty of help for things like that. If you get to yes, I put down 6 different modes of operation going forward that you could adopt, and I'm guessing there are more as well. Hibernation, if you decide that we're viable but only barely, let's just hibernate. Let's just be like a bear, go into its den in November and wait out the storm and try to emerge in the spring when hopefully things are better. What does that mean? Just keeping the lights on and the doors maybe locked, but you can still open them. So you could go to minimal operation. Maybe you have multiple markets or multiple product lines. You pare those back and you go after only 1 or 2 of them instead of all at once. Could be business as usual. Certainly there are companies out there who are not that badly affected by this, or who don't know anything else, but going through straight ahead with business as usual, may not have the resources or the bandwidth to change anything. So, but they're far enough along. They've placed their bet. They're going to keep placing it, business as usual. A hybrid approach could be any mix of the way you do business in the geographies, the products, the services, the people, et cetera, et cetera. Hybrid is just what it sounds like. You need to figure out something unique that's unlike what you're doing now, but maybe has applicability in surviving these rough times. Accelerated growth for those companies that have both the asset base, the resources, and the bandwidth to go into overdrive. There are companies out there, venture funds in particular, that are being very aggressive in investing in companies. Valuations are down, therefore they'll get a better deal. So I think you as a company, if you see opportunities to go after things that you might have wanted before but couldn't get, maybe that opportunity is presenting itself. It's certainly worth a look around and see who's doing it. Again, that competitive landscape awareness will come in very handy here. Or something else. Again, there's as many different ways to grow and change a business as there are businesses and leadership teams. So you need to think about where those things are headed for you. So I'm going to stop really quickly and ask a 2-part survey that you can respond to by the Q&A on the chat here. First is, are you going through, in whatever sense, your own triage/go, no-go decision? And because COVID-19 has changed your perceptions about your company? And if you had to pick one of the 3 on the left-hand column, which would it be? So if you want to go ahead and answer those, I will continue on. This seems a pretty apt image of how a lot of people must feel nowadays. One day they're sitting behind their desk, the next they're in a swimming pool trying to stay afloat. So if you're going to survive, if you get to the go, no go, and you get thumbs up, you're going to keep going, what do you have to do? Well, at the very minimum, you've got to stay afloat. Survival at all costs. Without that, nothing else matters, which sounds fairly evident, but you'd be surprised how many startups don't seem really to realize that. And I feel like that's a lesson you can never emphasize too many times. Communication is obviously critical. We're going to hear a lot about that from Jock. Runway extension, again, your cash availability, the length you have, how long can you stay afloat with what you have now? I think if you do some research into the way the big venture firms are approaching this, several came out and said, no more money for our startups between 12 and 24 months. I mean, that's a pretty radical step. If you're a startup in their portfolio and all of a sudden money you thought was coming your way is now not coming your way, what do you do? I'm guessing some feel betrayed, others feel like, well, now we're on our own more than ever. And so I think you need to consider that things you might have expected to come through will not, and you've got to figure out your own way to extend your runway. Operations tracking. I always think every company should be super diligent about its operations. That's not always the case, but now you really, really need to be that way. You've got to figure out where are you efficient, where are you inefficient, who's pulling their weight, who's not, and pull together and become super lean, ultra lean if you can, because that's what's going to be expected of you. Stakeholder updates, again, that falls under communication, I suppose, but keep everybody, investors, customers, employees, spouses, early supporters, whoever, keep them updated about where you're at. It's hard to over-communicate. It is possible, but it's hard to over-communicate the state of your company and how you're doing. So it's really important to have the proper messaging prepared and put out there on a regular basis, whether it's social media, press releases, white papers, conferences, I don't know, whatever happens nowadays in this virtual age. SWOT lookout, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Be on the lookout for these. You should be all the time, but again, now more than ever. I think coronavirus amplifies everything we might have looked at before, at least the bad things, the potential for bad things. So you've got to have your radar up 24/7. And I think the last line there is you get to demonstrate leadership in uncertain times. Anybody can make it when times are good, but it's when times are bad and times are tough, as they certainly are now. If you demonstrate leadership and can show people how you've managed to survive through this, then I think you'll have a great story to tell and a way to create confidence in investors in the future about what you're all about and why you're a better bet than other companies might be. So I'm a big one for demonstrating leadership, however uncertain it is. It's now more than ever.
Maybe now's a good time to show the poll results. To have a quick look at that.
All right, 78% said yes. Accelerate growth, wow, I wasn't expecting that. That's great to hear. I'd love to hear some details about that. Maybe Michael, you can facilitate a follow-up. People can write in messages about what they're up to. That's great to hear. So good job, everybody out there who's being diligent about this. So expansion of time of contraction, similar to the accelerated growth, there's a bit of irony here that as markets slow down that you may be in today, let's say you're a Dutch company and you work in Northern Europe or throughout Europe, as those markets slow down, you need to think about expansion at a time when expansion may be the last thing you're able to do or want to think about doing. So, but you can't sit around and wait for your own markets to recover. You've got to be aggressive in thinking about the wider world. And that's what we do over here. We're getting a lot of inquiries about how things look here and are conditions improving, as in availability of talent, reduced rents, more available capital, all things that you can find are making things more likely for companies to expand over to the US, which is a daunting prospect at any time, especially now, but maybe now is the time to think about it. So as I keep saying, now more than ever. So just about done here. Where are you going to be? I mean, this seminar is not designed to tell you what to do. It's designed to get you to think about the ways in which you can navigate through these difficult times and reach a point where you're more viable, more sustainable. And if you can weather this, you can weather just about anything. So I'll go on to say that, or ask, when the next storm hits, are you going to be ready? Because you can bet something else is coming, whether it's a resurgence of coronavirus later in the year, at which point people who are already conditioned to think about shutting down might be on a hair trigger to do it even more quickly. What can you do to prepare for it? There's everything I've talked about so far is designed to get you into that mindset of that preparation, because there's another storm coming. You can see a big hurricane heading for Florida right there. it's my contention that the things that you do today, the survival techniques that you can create and implement today, should become the way you work as a norm tomorrow, because you should always be hyper efficient and alert and diligent and aggressive and aware of opportunities, now more than ever. But there's no reason to go back to whatever you did before. You've got to show that you are a modern, during and post-corona era company, which means super lean, super smart, super diligent. And I call it ultra lean as the new normal operating mode. There's a lot of talk of new normals. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's coming and you've got to be ready for it, and you've got to help create it for yourself. So with that, I'll say thank you. Thanks again to Michael and the team. There's my contact information. I'm happy to, Michael has my slides, and anybody who wants a copy is free to get them. If you're interested, there's a link at the bottom. The National Venture Capital Association published an interesting article recently about capital crunch over the coming months here in Silicon Valley, both the downside and the upside. And that's about 20 pages long, but it's a good read. So I encourage you to do it if you have the time. So with that, I'll say thank you. And Jock, over to you.
Well, just one sec, Paul. Just
Okay.
a quick thanks for this. There was one quick question by Doreen.
Sure.
She was wondering about valuations in the Valley. What's going on with valuations of companies? Maybe you can share some insights on that. But one thing is clear: it's a buyer's market. That's for sure. And the days that talent is super expensive and not very loyal and moving all around in these companies, I think those days are a bit over in Silicon Valley, which, it's an opportunity for a lot of companies. But in terms of valuations, they're certainly down. And I think VCs will wait at least a few more months before they will actually enter in the market and start buying companies against much lower valuation. But any insights that you can share on this?
Hi, sorry about that. I got dropped off for a moment. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Paul.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that. So the question was about valuations and how is it changing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, a lot of folks think valuation is up to the company. It is not. It's up to the investors. And there's a lot of rude surprises when people come in saying, we're worth 30 million pre-money. What do you think? And someone says, I'll give you 12 on a good day. And you're like, that's not really what I was hoping for. So I think nowadays, as a buyer's market or an investor's market, valuations are more subject to reduction than ever. But I think it's a mistake to focus on valuation too much when raising money or when considering your viability. Valuation is important, of course, because it determines the amount of equity you end up selling, but it's not the be all and end all unless it's your last round. I mean, things happen in the future to affect the equity distribution. And I think if you're starved for cash now and someone comes along and they look for a low valuation that you think involves too much equity, then you've got to decide, what do I care more about, my company surviving or having a certain percentage of equity in my pocket? And that's a difficult decision to make. But as I often tell people, never be greedy early, be greedy later when there's something big to share in. So focusing too much on valuation and having a set idea in your head about what your valuation is, if you're a young company, is not really a great strategy and will not get you great results here, especially now as coronavirus continues making its way through the economy.
Hey, Paul, the last question before we move to Jock, but what's the influence of the elections? Do you see some companies just holding off, just waiting to see what's going to happen with the elections before they start a lot of new activity?
Well, that's about a 6-hour answer, but I would say that the election here, the election is both, of course, it's hugely uncertain, and the impact of which way it goes will determine an awful lot of people's enthusiasm about the way things work here. But by the same token, markets are not generally that either susceptible to or responsive to elections. Sure, if you get a more pro-business president in Congress, you're going to have people who think, okay, now's the time, for expansion and to be more aggressive. And there's opposite reactions to that as well. I think there's so much, you think there's uncertainty in business. The uncertainty around our politics is so extreme that 1 week to the next, you have no idea who's ahead, what's likely, what might be the outcome. I'm afraid I have nothing too concrete to offer because it's such a complex issue and there's so much uncertainty, and the ratio of good information to bad information is probably about 50-50, I'd say. So it's really hard to know what's going on. The uncertainty we're learning to deal with in COVID can certainly be applied to our political system as well. So stay tuned on that, and think good thoughts for us, everybody.
Yeah, stay tuned on that one. Thanks, Paul. Okay, great. So, companies go through this process. I think this gives them a sort of a push, an opportunity to make these decisions, to really look strategically at the business. And once they made that decision, you really need to, create the exposure for yourself. So, Jock, can you share us your insights on, doing PR amidst the times of crisis?
Sure thing. And ironically, I think I need to pivot because looks like my screen here is refusing to let me share. Let me see. How about now?
Oh, good. Yeah, we have your slides.
Excellent. See, that's what you got to do. Stay calm, pivot, don't panic. I would have had just to switch over to PDF. And just like with the current situation, that is really, I think what I would say, first of all, the mindset that people need to have. It's very challenging. It can be very stressful because you don't know what's happening. But marketing in the current situation really requires a calm mind and a plan. And that's what I want to talk to you and the audience a little bit about. Thank you, everybody, for letting me into your work routine and into your days for a couple of minutes. I'm going to be talking about marketing in the age of COVID-19, and obviously, as you can see, and as we've all experienced, the situation really has changed quite a bit. You can see in my background, I cleared out my entire office because I'm socially distancing, and it's the same wherever you go. And obviously, also when you go shopping, you see that things have changed dramatically. So what that requires of you as a business is really to think about, what does it mean for you to exist in this current situation? What kind of impact does it have on you? And I thought this particular quote here was really interesting. Businesses exist to serve society. So of course, as a business and as a startup or as an established one, doesn't really matter. You also need to make money, but you can't exist in a vacuum without society. So I think that's a really important thing from a marketing and positioning standpoint that I would encourage you to keep in mind. And if somebody like an executive VP at Walmart says that, you can bet on many other businesses thinking along the same lines. So I definitely encourage that. And, as the situation around us looks like, everything is closed, and people are just shuttering down, behind the scenes, things are going on. And behind those closed doors, things are happening that are really important to us. And with that, really from a marketing and communications perspective, the thing to keep in mind is that now is definitely not the time for silence, right? If you just think, okay, you know what, we're going to press the pause button and we're going to wait until all of this blows over, that's not the right approach, I would say. And instead, I would encourage you to think along the lines of, what happens in those paramount moments and when norms start to shift. And once we come out of these, we will look back and we will think, how did somebody behave in that particular situation? And people will remember, right? They remember the good and the bad, and they remember how you behaved as an organization during those times of COVID and also during other pivotal moments. So from a business perspective, obviously you, like Paul just pointed out, you have to think about a couple of very important aspects of your business, right? You have to keep the lights on first and foremost. What's your strategy to do that, right? Most importantly, it's all about cash preservation, and it's about making sure that you have the right business setup in place to actually allow you to exist further. So, what does that mean in terms of your product offerings, in terms of your service opportunities? What kind of adaptation can you make, and how can you adjust to any kind of trends that you see happening around you, whether you like to be exposed to them or not? They are happening, and so it's up to you as a business to actually respond to them. But we are in the times of crisis, and one of the things that is so interesting to me about crisis from a marketing perspective is every time really is pre-crisis communication. You have to think about that for a second, because you never know when a crisis is going to happen and when it's going to come down on you and when you will be forced to respond. So, you know, what you're doing today, what you consider normal, is really just pre-crisis communication as you're preparing for the next crisis to happen. And that's why for good communicators and good marketers, it's so important to always have a crisis communications plan and a positioning plan in their drawer, so that they can actually go out of the gate quickly and make a public statement, show how they adapt, that they can show how they adjust the business, and that they know what to monitor to see the impact across the business, and be able to actually speak in a meaningful way to the different audiences that they have, in order to keep everybody updated and everybody informed. Because that is really one of the key things when you look at the principles of crisis communications. Understand what everybody is going through. Consider the changes your customers and your audiences are going through. Put yourself in their shoes, and don't think about yourself, but think about what are they experiencing right now and how do you fit into that environment. As a result of that, don't just wait for people to come to you and ask for updates. Be proactive about it. You know, you have a ton of different platforms to communicate these days, whether it's social, your website, flyers, whatever you have. There's a lot of things that you can leverage as channels. So be proactive about it and keep people updated. Also be reactive and make sure that your communications team, that your executives, that your support teams, your customer facing employees, that they are all equipped and ready to tell the same story, so that when people hear about you and that when they engage with you, that they actually experience one consistent company and not different fragments of the same company, but different perspectives from different people. And last but not least, listen to your customers. So using times like these to actually learn about people and learn about the people that engage with you, that buy from you, that partner with you, and hear what is really important to them, hear what they need, so that you can learn from that and really potentially take that input, adjust your product offerings, adjust your service offerings. Those are really great ways to actually move your company forward. So what does that mean, right? It means you're going to have a lot of different audiences and decision makers to engage with. And with that, we're going to do a quick poll, which is really about, have you prepared messages for your respective audiences already? Because if you haven't, I would argue, you know, you're already one step behind. So I'm curious to see what the results are. As you're answering that question, obviously it's not an easy thing to really break down all these different audiences that you need to talk to, whether it's your partners, your customers, your investors, the dealers that are distributing your products. There's a lot of different audiences to consider. But the key thing here is really to make sure that you understand you have to develop one consistent message, and the message just has to be tweaked and adjusted as it reaches each of these audiences. So you don't have many different messages, you have one message, just in different variations, expressed in different ways, but always the same message. Can we see the results from the poll? Excellent. So that is absolutely fantastic. And when I saw the poll from Paul's session, where people talked about where the poll showed how everybody was going proactively about making changes, I thought that was very encouraging already. So let's break down those messages for a second. So let's take a quick look at what does it mean for you when you speak to your investors. Right? I'm not going to read this entire slide to you. You can read for yourself, but again, don't panic. Do not rush. Make sure that you have a good assessment of the situation. so that you can actually go out and you don't have with one piece of information and you don't have to provide revisions all the time. Get the timing right. Make sure that you reach your investors at the right time, whether it's by press release or if you need to do a full year guidance to announce it directly or during an earnings call, maybe if you're public. Use a range, right, or a minimum value. Give yourself a little bit of room and air so that you don't have to come up with revisions again later, and that you don't box yourself in. And especially when you're talking to the financial community, keep it tight, right? Don't stuff too much information in there. Acknowledge what's going on, clarify the situation, and have very clear messages and communicate directly, right? Your investors don't just want to know what you tell everybody. They want to know the overall guidance, but then reach out to your particular investors, to the key investors that you have, and speak to them directly. Pick up the phone and seek the direct conversation. You can't sit down with them over a coffee right now, but definitely make the effort to speak to them on a regular basis and keep them updated. Now to your customers, same thing, right? But again, slightly different angles. Your customers are going to look for reassurance. They want to hear what's going on with you. Is your product safe? You know, are there any issues with your product? Will you still be around in 3 to 6 months? You know, if I buy your product today, am I still going to be able to use it? Are you going to run out of service opportunities? Can I buy today, and how can you as an organization encourage people to buy from you as quickly as you can so that you can keep cash coming in? Here you see 3 examples. One is from TaskRabbit, based in San Francisco. They made sure that people who use their services wouldn't have to worry about cancellation fees. You see the example from United, right? Book now and know you have the flexibility. It's not an issue if you buy an airplane ticket right now, because you know that you can still use it, whether it's in a month or in 6, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, super important, your employees, right? Your employees are truly one of the core assets that you have as an organization. Without your employees, you're nothing, right? And so what does it mean for you when you take care of your organization? It means that you have to take care of your employees. And I find it really encouraging to see a couple of examples, specifically also from the Bay Area, like Microsoft, who has a really big campus over here, like Trader Joe's, who's a California-based company, owned, interestingly, by Aldi Group, which is based in Germany. So you would think culturally they have maybe a slightly different stance, but they don't, right? They give employees additional paid sick time to make sure that they don't spread any kind of disease, any kind of viruses, but also making sure that your hourly workers continue to get paid, because you will know that these people need to rely on you, and you rely on them later as you ramp up your efforts again. And of course, Salesforce, headquartered in San Francisco, also making sure their employees are being taken care of from a safety and well-being standpoint. So what does all of that mean, right? It means your community needs you. You have to serve your community. You exist to serve a community, and you have to focus on them, not on yourself. Of course, you're a business. You need to sell things, right? Whether it's products or services, but you have to serve others in order to exist. And so right now is actually a great time to focus on those things, but also double and triple down on your digital engagement and seek those channels out, because whatever you do, it's all about adapting, right? And that can look differently depending on whatever your business is. And here are some examples, right? It means for many different organizations to adapt in the face of adversity, and whether that is Image Options here over here in San Jose, who started to develop protective equipment, whether it's Bloom Energy, also based over here in the Silicon Valley area, and provider of energy supply solutions, switched over into making respirators overnight, literally. Or if you're, for example, just a sushi restaurant and you adapt your offerings to include 2 rolls of toilet paper and face masks, right? I'm not sure about the example here with Heinz and the Essentials bundle. It's definitely an adaptation. I'm not sure that's my favorite one that I want to have at home, but you know, it just goes to show the principle. You have to adapt, you have to help, think about what others are going through. And that can, again, take very different formats, right? You have to pick up your customers where they are, pick up your audience where they are, whether you're a winery and you're offering virtual wine tastings on Instagram video, or you're maybe a backup and security company that is using webinars to show their business partners, their channel partners, how they can apply for small business administration loans. All of these things are super helpful. And like I said, you know, people will remember. You will come out of this crisis and they will remember what's going on and what you have been doing. So the most important thing is really put yourself in their shoes, but don't just sell, because that will backfire. At the same time, you know, you're not leading with a sales message, but again, you have to keep your business in mind, and you have to remember how to actually keep your business running. So think about, you know, where those buying decisions are being made. And that's where digital marketing, where social and where communications really comes in, and where it can be tremendously helpful, because those social media channels, those influencer engagements, those are the things that people use as guiding posts when they look to make their buying decisions. And with that, right now, for you is a fantastic time actually to think about your employee base, think about influencer, to tell the story of your brand, how you actually adapt, how you care about people, and tell that brand story in that context, however challenging it might be. Right now is a great time to think about that and actually use digital and social and influencers to learn about your prospects. Again, how can you adapt? See what your audience is doing and see what they need. Maybe there's a twist to your offering that you can actually apply so that it makes what you have to offer even more attractive, right? You know that shelter in place will stop eventually, right? It's already happening, and it's like buying stocks, right? I mean, you know it's going to happen, so you have to get into the market when it's low. There's a lot of uncertainty, but you know that you have to plan for the path forward. And whether you make those adaptations on one of your channels, right? Whether it's the website, email marketing, your social, your influencer marketing, you know, all of those messages, all of these adaptations have to happen across whatever it is that you do as an organization. And at the same time, your job is going to be to make sure that this message is consistent, recognizable, and that it is so no matter which platform you use, right? Think about the brand affinity and availability of the audiences that you're talking to. The ones closest to you are your employees, your partners, your fans, right? You have followers and mentioners and industry analysts maybe on different other platforms, but focus on those that are really close to you, where you have an opportunity to make a direct impact. Focus on the people that really care about you as a brand and engage with them. Make sure that they become amplifiers of your message, and don't forget the mid-tier, but focus on the closest and the next closest ones. Don't focus on trying to convince now the people that don't care about you in the first place. And last but not least, really, now is the time to lay the foundation and build the runway for future success, right? Focus on your organic content, on your paid ads, work with influencers, and really make sure that you bring this message across, how you have adapted, how you help people, how you fit into their current environment, and get those messages straight no matter where you are. So with that, you know, keep safe, keep clean, you know, wash your hands, and connect with me on LinkedIn. If I can help you in any way, let me know, and good luck with your efforts. And back to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Jock. I think it's very helpful, things that you mentioned. Now, there is a big push on startups to reduce costs. And I read a lot about, well, don't spend any money on marketing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably the worst advice anybody can give right now, right? There's this one quote that I've been seeing going around quite a bit, where people say, the person who's stopping marketing is somebody like somebody who's stopping marketing in order to save money is somebody who's stopping the clock in order to save time, right? It just doesn't work like that. And like I said, that's really the point I was trying to make. For people right now, it's so super important to actually make sure that they lay the foundation right now as an organization to really be on top of things as people re-engage with them, right? We have all now been locked away for a number of weeks, and people are going to come out of their holes eventually. But communicating consistently throughout the time that we're going through right now, making sure people understand you're still there, you're active, you're continuing your business, they can rely on you, and showing them that you're adapting, but also laying that foundation and making sure that you can take off when others actually have slowed down after everything comes back to normal. I think that is really critical.
Do you see do you see a difference in mindset or in culture in between Europe and the US, where maybe Europeans are a little bit slower, that they don't want to come across as being too salesy or too pushy? Because then it feels like, I'm taking advantage of a crisis. But I think you should just move ahead. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're making a great point, right? Because you don't want to be seen as an ambulance chaser. And that's also one of the things I was trying to convey, right? You have to make sure that you don't look like you're trying to sell, right? You want to consider what people are going through. You want to adapt your offering, and you want to make sure that, because you don't know how long this situation is going to last, you want to make sure that you fit into it and that your products adapt and adjust as necessary, right? At the same time, you don't want to be seen like you're taking advantage of it. You have to really think about that right mix and being genuinely helpful, right? And there's many different ways how you can be genuinely helpful. I gave that example of that company called Datto. They are a tech company. They have a big channel with how they sell their products, and they help their channel partners by giving a webinar with a tax expert that showed them step by step, how can I apply for small business loans right now, right? Fantastic, right? It's not a sales pitch. It's hugely helpful, but boy, will people remember who helped them actually get that small business loan if they did, right? Look at that company that is selling sushi, right? It addresses a lot of business people maybe that are maybe stuck in California and that actually need to eat, right? They need to have something, but they also need some of the necessities, right? So being able to actually think about what your target audience is going through and providing them with something as ridiculous as toilet paper and face masks may actually go a long way in that moment, right? So don't try to force it. Really think about your audience. Try to be helpful. And I think there's definitely hesitation or a different stance with that kind of thinking in Europe versus in the US. I think the US is definitely pushing a little bit harder for those kinds of things. And I think there's you have to think about the cultural context where you are, right? So just because people are pushing harder over here doesn't mean it fits into the right environment over in Europe or in Asia, right? You have to be aware of those cultural differences.
Yeah, but be genuine, be authentic, and just show that you care on what's going on, and that you care about your customers. Okay, good on that, Jock. Many thanks. Thanks for your insights. I also want to thank Paul for his contribution to the webinar. Then Aisha and Sietze, my colleagues behind the scenes that you haven't seen, thank you very much for helping me out with this webinar. These are two mentors from our community. We are there to help. We facilitate matchmaking. We help young and ambitious entrepreneurs to scale in the West Coast. So if you want to have access, if you want to learn more, just drop me an email. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.